A very good afternoon to you and welcome to the Sunday Forum. I'm Canon Tricia Hillis and I'm the Canon Pastor here at St Paul's, and it's my very, very great pleasure to introduce and to welcome our speaker for today, Margaret Silf. Now, Margaret, as many of you will know, is a popular retreat leader and the author of many best-selling spiritual guides for the spiritual journey. Margaret, I feel that I've already been with you, although we've only just met. I think I almost feel like I've been with Margaret in the desert through reading The Way of Wisdom, which is an encouraging book. And also I feel that I've been on a seafaring adventure with you through this book, At Sea with God. And I personally am deeply grateful for all that you've opened up for so many of us who are hungry for God. Now, today, Margaret is joining us to speak about what is faith. It's a deceptively simple title, but this petite yet profound book concerns some of the most gigantic questions that we can ask of God and of ourselves. It's very easy to get the impression that faith is only about creeds, about doctrines, and about knowledge. But what if faith is more about mystery than mastery? What if living in the mystery could allow us to shift our focus from religion to relationship with the divine? Margaret will look at some of the illusions and the obstacles to faith and offer some suggestions about ways to find or to deepen or to come back to that mystery of faith. Margaret's going to be talking for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for conversation together, spurred by your own questions. And after that, you'll have a chance, along with me, I think I'll be first in the queue, to buy copies of her books if you would like to. So would you please join me in welcoming Margaret to the Sunday Forum.
Thank you very much, Tricia, and thank you for inviting me here today. And it's daunting, a sea of people. Thank you for coming today. You're very welcome. I'm welcoming you to your own place here. Thank you for welcoming me here. So let's explore. The title, deceptively simple though it may be, of that little book was not my title. It was a title I almost didn't write. Darton, Longman and Todd asked me to write the first in a series called Simple Faith, and the title was to be Faith. And I said to the editor who asked me, that sounds like a book that tells people what they would have to believe to be able to call themselves Christian. I'm not doing that. And he said, no. After we'd mellowed a bit over lunch, he said, tell us about what faith actually, what it means to you to be a person of faith, basically. And so I think that's really the question. What would it mean in today's world to be a person of faith? In a world where there's so much polarization between people of faith and people of none, between people of different faith traditions, between people of different traditions within one faith tradition, and between people of faith and what I would call, with some respect, but not too much, the rampant atheists, the almost evangelical atheists who are determined to convert the world to their view. If Mr. Dawkins is among us, which I very much doubt, apologies to any present, but we live in a very divided world. What does it mean to be a person of faith? I'll start by sharing a story that came my way, I don't know where from. You may know it, about a kind of, I suppose, a circus performer who did a high wire act over an abyss with no safety net. And he walked this high wire across this abyss, and he entertained the crowds that way. And they came along and cheered him on and said, well, fantastic. And one day he decided he'd enhance the act a bit. So he brought a wheelbarrow with him. So he said to the crowds, today I'm going to push this wheelbarrow across the high wire. And they all cheered. And he said, do you believe I can do this? And they all said, yes, yeah, we believe you can do this. And then he said, okay, which of you is going to get in the wheelbarrow? And the moral behind that really is, it's easy to believe. It's not actually easy. We have to force ourselves. We have to do some intellectual acrobatics to do what Alice in Wonderland calls believing 6 impossible things before breakfast. But it is possible to make our minds accept certain things that reason would rather question. It's possible to assent to creeds and doctrines. It's quite probable that most of us who do that do so with one finger crossed, with 2 fingers crossed behind our backs. I know I've not yet actually met any practicing Christians who really can honestly say all these things and really believe them. However, it's much, much harder to get in the wheelbarrow. And really, this man Jesus of Nazareth that we claim to follow asks only that of us to get in the wheelbarrow. And that takes faith for me to a different level. And perhaps a few years ago now, I can remember the time when I moved from a head kind of believer to, if you go back to the Latin of fides, the root of the word faith, it actually means primarily not intellectual assent, but trust. And faith for me is going to be about trust. So that changes things rather radically. And can faith, that kind of faith, be simple? Well, simplicity is an interesting concept. Let me put this to you at some risk of ruffling feathers along the line, but I'll risk it. If I look at the Gospels, I see the pattern of a man teaching and revealing the fullness of God's love in all sorts of ways, through healing, through teaching, through being present, through conversations, and telling stories, close to my heart, telling stories. And I see the pattern in that the people that he told the stories to, or moved among, or had conversations with, included the most simple, the least literate, or the completely illiterate of his time, the completely unschooled, and the highest that degrees of education, the lawyers and the Pharisees and so on. He told his stories to all, but the powerful pattern that comes through the Gospels is the people who mainly got it were the people who didn't have the education. That doesn't mean some of the people who did have education didn't get it, but it's not hard to get the meanings behind the parables, especially if you translate some of them into modern times. Things like the Good Samaritan. Who are the Samaritans today? The people that you really don't quite want to know. And then they're the very ones that go and do something really good for you, or really stand up to be counted when it matters. You could translate things in all sorts of ways like that. So actually in the Gospel, you get Jesus' message transmitted in a way that is simple to grasp, but impossibly hard to live, as I think you'd all agree. However, it's moved and morphed into institutional practices which, seen from the outside, I know it's not like this on the inside, but seen from an outsider's point of view, it seems you've got to go through a lot of hoops and learn a lot of stuff, and 39 articles and however many bits of the catechism and goodness knows what all, to actually get in. It's quite hard. So you've got to do something, you've got to train, you've got to work at it. I can remember my confirmation classes when I was 13, and I enjoyed them, but you had to do something. You had to decide whether you were going to buy into this and believe it. So, in a sense, hard to join, but, and this is the bit that is a gross distortion of the truth, I know. There are many who, from looking at it from outside, would say, but once you're in, it's easy to live it. You just have to keep your nose clean and go to church on Sundays and do the right things. That is a distortion, we all know that, but it's easily understood why people might think that. So what happened? Can faith actually be simple? I'll come back to that question, but just that distinction between, and I don't want to draw yet another distinction, but a distinction between people who would say they are people of faith, whatever faith, right across the spectrum, and people who would say they are not. And I asked myself, what questions would we answer differently as people of faith to those who might think otherwise? I'm not sure. I'd need to think this through a lot more, because there are many more questions, and I'm not sure it's an easy distinction. In fact, I'm sure it's not. But two questions that would be fundamental to my life of faith would be, where is my life centered? Or where do I want my life to be centered? In me and my ego self, or in a deeper center of gravity? People of faith, of all faiths, know that they desire and are conscious of the fact that their lives are held from a deeper center, not just their own ego self. Now, that's also true of people who wouldn't profess faith. It doesn't mean they're all egoists, not at all, but that question would be clear for a person of faith. I want my life to be centered in the mystery I call God, and I want my actions to be in alignment with that mystery. And another question would be, does life have meaning? And here we go back to the Dawkins kind of people, who would say, no, it's completely random. The universe just happened to bring us here. I find that harder to believe than the 6 impossible things before breakfast. But the question of does my life have meaning? I think many people of faith would say, whatever the meaning is, and it's always going to be out of reach, because God's ways are not our ways. We are not, with our human mentalities and abilities, going to grasp the mystery of the eternal. If we could, it wouldn't be God. It would be something we'd fabricated ourselves. But the fact that we want to live our lives as if they have meaning means that actually we do try to live meaningful lives. If life has no meaning, why are volunteers going in droves to Western Africa to help Ebola patients? If life has no meaning, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just sit in Starbucks and drink your coffee? Lots of examples of people who are living the meaning as they go, and making all of us see, wow, this gives you a glow inside and says, humanity is worth something, we're going somewhere, we're evolving into something more than we are now. So faith certainly says yes. It says yes to mystery, the mystery that we can't ever know. And it says yes to meaning. I want to live my life meaningfully, even though I don't yet grasp the fullness of what that meaning is. Lots of ways in which we could unpack all that, but I want to move on, or I'll fall off the end of the edge of the universe in 5 minutes time. But the question of simplicity, we are, one of the hallmarks of our lives in the Western world today is we are absolutely showered with, or suffocating with clutter and excess, certainly materially, and sometimes I dare say even spiritually. With complications, we know about the material excess, and if you don't know about material excess, walk along Oxford Street in the next 4 weeks and you'll find out. Just total overload. My 2 grandchildren, I suggested to my daughter tentatively, are we robbing them of the experience of joy? The joy I felt when I unpacked my Christmas stocking, which had the same predictable 6 things in it every year for don't know how long. And yet every year, the joy of seeing the lights come on Christmas Eve, not 4 weeks earlier, on the Christmas tree, and hearing those carols on Christmas Eve, joy. I don't see that now in my grandchildren, because they just go from one parcel to the next. and I'm sad about that. But spiritually, we can overload ourselves too with complications, with theories, with obscure definitions that we don't understand ourselves, but we put them out there in jargon that nobody else understands either. Just to illustrate what I mean, a story from my own daughter's childhood. I'm not sure how old she was. The more I think about it, the more I think she must have been a bit older than I thought, but I had it in my head that she was preschool at the time, but maybe that wasn't so, but certainly not more than about 6. She was playing one day with an abacus, and she was shunting the beads along, and she was counting 0 up to 9, fine. And then she suddenly got it that if you put a 1 in front of them, you could go from 10 to 19. Put a 2 in front, you could go from 2 to 29, 30 to 39, and so on. She was so thrilled with this discovery, you could have thought that you'd engendered a little Einstein. She was so over the moon. And I encouraged her, I said, yeah, and it can go on and on and on. And then when she got tired of messing with the abacus, she turned to me and said, Mummy, where does it all end? And I said, because I didn't know what else to say, I said, well, we call it infinity. Well, if you've ever tried to explain infinity to a 6-year-old, I did my best, but she glazed over, and that was the end of the abacus for the afternoon. So she played with something else, end of story. But 3 or 4 hours later, bedtime, and I read her a bedtime story, and I gave her a bedtime hug, tucked her in for the night, was about to switch the light off. And she sat up in her bed, and she flung her arms around my neck, and she said, Mummy, I love you past numbers. And I've never ever forgotten that, because I failed to describe infinity completely, but she got it. She got it better than anything I could have explained. So yeah, faith can be simple, but not simplistic in the sense of fundamentalist, which just puts, in my view, puts a ring around a certain bit of the doctrines and says, that's it, and if you're in there, you're on the safe island, and if you're not, you're out of it. That's not my scene. So it's not simplistic, but simple in the sense of being able to live in mystery and being okay living in mystery without trying to get certainty for ourselves in our own sense of the word. So that leads me on to look at this question of who is this God? What is this mystery we call God? And what can we say in simple terms, that probably non-controversial terms, about what is this mystery we call God? You may know of the story of the little girl in kindergarten, and they had a painting session, and the kindergarten teacher was walking around admiring, as you do, you know, your own children and grandchildren, and what a wonderful painting it is, it should be in the Tate Modern and all that. And so she stopped by one little girl and admired this creation, and she said to the little girl, which was a fatal mistake, never ask a child this, she said, that's beautiful, Sarah, or whatever the child's name was. What is it? Never ask that, never. Just an aside on that, I'll come back to the little girl. I once asked my daughter to scribble, she was just learning to write, and she produced this scribble all over the page. And I made that mistake. I said, that's great, Kirsten. What does it mean? And her answer, verbatim, was, I don't know what it means, I only rot it. And I felt that, you know, I should have that as an inscription on every book I ever write. Don't ask me what it means, I only rot it. But the little girl with the painting, so the teacher says, that's beautiful, what is it? And the little girl says, it's a picture of God. And the teacher says, now that's really interesting, because nobody's ever seen God. So nobody really knows what God looks like. God's looking down on us through the grid there. Oh, he's just walked away with his backpack, it's okay. And so this is the teacher's answer. And then the little girl looks at her as only a little child can look at you, and says, well, they will when I finish my picture. So we have a lot of images of this God. We have and we know that they're only images, and we know that most of them are not helpful images. The Santa Claus God, for instance, the one who delivers everything we might ask for. We just give God a list of the things on our wish list, and there they come, or don't, and then of course we have a crisis of faith. Or the Mr. Fix-It God. I use the Mr. Fix-It God a lot. I've often, in the past, and still do a bit, I see the problem, I work out the solution. I put it all there in my head, out there as a kind of business proposal to God, and all I ask God to do is deliver. Does God ever deliver? No. What God delivers is something wildly different from what you'd worked out. So Mr. Fix-It God isn't a very useful image. There's the policeman God, or the strict head teacher God, who's just waiting for you to make a mistake. And the more doctrinaire or punishment-oriented aspects of our faith traditions, or bits of our faith traditions, tend to produce people who are very fear-filled because of that very thing. One false step and you're out. A zero-tolerance God who is waiting to eliminate you from the kingdom. What's that about? Usually it's a projection from our own childhood, from some experience of being excessively schooled and policed and so on. It's certainly not the mystery we call God. Then there's the God who finds a parking space. Now, Catholics are very good at that because they have saints for these things as well. And I'll tell you an Irish story, and I do really, truly love the Irish, and they write their own jokes, and we just import them as if we'd invented them, and they tell stories like you wouldn't believe, and some of you will surely know that. So this is a story told to me by an Irish person, and I can't do the accent, sadly. I wish I could. But so this man is on his way in Dublin to an important meeting and needs a parking space. So up go the hands. This is typical Irish prayer. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I need a parking space. I've got to get to this meeting. Nothing. So he decides to up the ante a bit. What will he do? How will he persuade this reluctant divinity? So he says, I need a parking space for this important meeting. You know how important this meeting is. If you find me a parking space, he says to God, what will I do, he thinks. Oh, sure, he says, I'll give up fornication. Instantly, parking space comes free. Right in front of him. So up go the hands again. It's okay, God, forget it. I've found one. And yet, the strange thing is, we all know that now and again it works, you know. And I don't know, sometimes you think, well, anyway, whatever. Surely God, the one who holds billions and trillions of galaxies in orbit is concerned about parking spaces. I don't know. A better image, though, than any of those, and it's still only an image, is one by the late Anthony de Mello, Indian Jesuit, who wrote lovely storybooks, parables. And one of his, you may well know this, is, one of his stories it's an open-ended story, and it's about the fish swimming in the ocean. And the fish has heard a rumor about this entity, this mystery called ocean. And it's searching for this mystery. And so it asks the other fish that it meets, have you seen, do you know about ocean? And the fish says, oh yes, everybody knows about ocean. Well, where is it? Oh, well, nobody knows where it is. Nobody's ever been there. Well, what does it look like? How will I recognize it when I find it? Well, nobody knows because nobody's ever seen it. So does the fish swim away, having decided that ocean is just a figment of fishy imagination? Or does the fish swim away having realized that ocean is the very mystery in which it lives and moves and has its being? And I think for me as a person of faith, that would be my image, the image that's most helpful to me of God. It's a mystery, the mystery in whom I live and move and have my being. And I can no more be out of it and live in any meaningful way than a fish can live out of water, or a bird can survive without the air. So even atheists, and I suspect that most atheists, or people who call themselves atheists, are actually rejecting, and rightly rejecting, a flawed image of God. You can't reject the mystery in whom you live and move and have your being. It doesn't make any sense. Or you know that lovely quote that you sometimes see, bidden or unbidden, God is here. I love that. That makes a lot of sense to me. So is there anything we can say about this mystery we call God? These are just things I would say that you don't have to, you would have your own. You would have written this book yourself, and all of you could have done in your own way. And it would have been, we would have had however many different books here. But one thing I want to say is, certainly God is mystery. And what God is not, and this is a bit, could raise a few eyebrows, God is not a big person like me, only much bigger and better and more powerful. And I got to a point where I personally have problems with that anthropomorphic view of God, because there's all kinds of dangers in it that we project the whole human stuff onto this God. We assume that God has feelings and desires and preferences which align actually with our own and might be completely contradictory to the desires and needs and preferences of the person next door or the person in another country. So I think there are a lot of dangers, but I can understand that we need a handle. And what else do you do except give this God a human handle? But it was quite a breakthrough and almost a breakdown for me to be able to say God is not a person like that. God is mystery. However, I want to qualify that straight away by saying, what can we say about this mystery? The first thing I would want to say about the mystery is it may not be a person, but it is profoundly personal, because I think we know from our own experience this mystery impacts us, touches us, inspires us, warns us, nudges us in all kinds of ways, in very personal ways that are unique to us, but at the same time is in that same personal contact and relationship with everyone else. So forget the big man in the sky, or the big whatever sexless person in the sky, or the big person anywhere else, because that is a bit fraught with complications, I think. But a mystery who is personally connecting with each of us, heart to heart, I would say. And that's already a bit more anthropomorphism, I know. But so the mystery is personal. And the mystery is also intentional, I believe, because it's going somewhere. The intention, what is the intention of this mystery we call God? Well, the intention is love, I think, but not the romantic 14th of February kind of love, and I'll look at that a bit more in a minute. The intention is love, in that I would suggest that this mystery I call God is constantly striving to bring more and more fullness of life, as Jesus himself said, out of whatever we present. Just as a loving parent doesn't send the 7-year-old back to the cradle because he gets something wrong at school. You start with wherever the person is and draw them on from that point, with bringing forth the maximum potential, the most loving possible outcome. So I would say, I can't name this mystery. This mystery is mystery and will always be mystery to me as a human being. But the mystery is personal, profoundly personal, uniquely personal, and is also intentional. In my life, I believe that God is striving to make the best of whatever messes I bring forth. And in our national life and our life on this planet, the same thing applies. I believe that dynamic of goodness is striving to bring us towards something greater, which many would call consciousness evolution, moving towards higher and higher levels of consciousness, which are making us more and more fully human, and therefore more fully reflective of the glory of God. And I see it in the evolutionary story, that you look back and you see from 4 billion years ago, life on this planet, from the tiniest beginnings, the first single-celled organisms being gradually evolved into something more and more complex. And I don't think we've arrived. If we think we've arrived anywhere, we have almost certainly gone down a cul-de-sac, friends. People who know that they've arrived have somehow got blocked, because to be a person of faith is to be on a journey, to be moving, to be growing, to be open to surprises. So God, one who is constantly striving and is himself, I'll use the pronoun, the dynamic of love, the dynamic of life. And we, in our turn, long to be in right relationship with this God. And that's been the case long before Jesus came to the planet. The earliest people, 12,000 years ago in Uluru in Australia, the Aboriginal people making their ceremonies, longing to be in right relationship with this deeper mystery around which they wanted their lives to be lived. The people in Ireland, in County Meath, the ancient burial chambers were deliberately constructed 4,000 or more years ago, so that the dawn light on the morning of the solstice would shine right through a small crack in the construction and illuminate the entire inner chamber. That's a kind of sacrament. People saying, we know that the mystery is bigger than we are, and we want to be in right relationship with that mystery. But relationship requires self-revelation, and it begins, I suggest, with God's self-revelation to us through creation, the first revelation, the natural world, through sacred scripture, through the universe story, through the lives of others, and especially the life of Jesus of Nazareth, and through all creative endeavors. Whatever we're doing, whether we're writing a symphony or singing in the community choir, whether we're mixing a Christmas cake or doing a Nigella Lawson on TV cook shows, all creative endeavors are fired by this mystery. And the events of our ordinary lives reveal that mystery. And we, in our turn, bring our concerns to God in prayer and hold them, as the Quakers say, hold them in the light. Just not trying to tell God what to do about them, but just holding with focused, loving intention and attention, holding these concerns in prayer. So, moving on rapidly, because we can't leave Jesus unattended to. We are Christians. Most of us in this room, I assume anyway, are Christians. Very little is known. What can we say about Jesus of Nazareth that isn't going to cause a furore with some other denomination? Very little is known about Jesus of Nazareth. A lot more is believed. We don't even know for sure what Jesus actually said. Scripture scholars, there's lots of questions, as I'm sure we all know. But whatever is recorded in the Gospels, and I'd include also the non-canonical Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels, and there's lots of wisdom in there, and you wonder why it was ruled out and what kind of a threat it posed at the time. But anyway, well, one thing Jesus, we believe, said, or the spirit of the man said, was, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And looking at that way, what could we say about that? If Jesus is the way, what could we... One thing, of course, it's frequently put, Jesus is the way, meaning Jesus is the only way. I have difficulties with that, actually, and I must confess that. Not that I'm not a theologian, and so I'm out of my depth here completely, but I'd prefer to hear the emphasis in that sentence slightly differently. I am the way, not the destination. Maybe, anyway, that's just a thought. But what is this way? Is there anything we can say that we might agree across all the divides about what this way is? And I'd suggest three things. It's a way of love, it's a way of truth, and it's a way of life itself. A way of love, not the 14th of February kind, although that's important too, of course. A way of love, the most important, helpful thing I ever read about love was in a book by M. Scott Peck, probably The Road Less Traveled, I'm not sure now which one, where he says, love is not an emotion, love is a decision. And I found that so extraordinarily helpful, because Jesus says, rather idealistically, love your neighbor as you love yourself, and then goes on to say, love your enemies and do good to those who do harm to you. And that's a really hard one. It's impossible if you see it as an emotion. First of all, most of us don't actually love or even like ourselves very much. So what hope for the silly old bat next door? What does it mean to love your neighbour? I lived in Scotland for 3 years, and we had a very harsh winter one year. And in the local news, there was a story of a lady, a young woman, who lived next door to the neighbour from hell. An older lady a very old lady, a very grumpy old lady, who complained about everything. If the leaves from the neighbour's trees fell on her side of the fence, she complained. If the cat peed on her lawn, she complained. That kind of a neighbour, you know? So there was no love lost between them until the winter came. And then this old lady got snowed in. She couldn't get her car out of the drive. She couldn't walk because she would have broken her bones if she had. So the younger woman thought to herself, I can't let her starve. So she went round and asked, did she need anything? And that developed over a few weeks, from bringing in a bit of shopping to bringing around a casserole, sharing a cup of tea and a cake. And by the time the snow melted, their relationship had also thawed, because the younger woman had chosen and decided, she'd made a decision to do the more loving thing, regardless of how she felt. You can apply that to enemies. In 1944, in Red Square, Moscow, some German prisoners of war were being marched through Red Square in triumph, I suppose, or whatever. They were in chains, they were in a terrible state. And because so many people in Russia, as we all know, had lost, everybody had lost somebody. And so the hatred and the fury and the rage against these, there they were, there in their hands, these people, these men, what would they do? So they had cordons to hold them back, the crowds back, so that they wouldn't actually mob these men. So this is a true story, well documented, you probably know it. So they come marching through the offices first, and they were jeered and spat at and so on. They were still in fairly decent uniforms. And then the men came through, the ordinary soldiers, battered, exhausted, starving, terrified, some in chains, wounded, on crutches and so on. And a complete silence fell over Red Square. And then one woman in the crowd looked into the eyes of one of these prisoners of war and saw a starving human being and thought to herself, I've got some bread in the kitchen, not much, but I've got a bit. She went back, got a bit of bread, broke through the cordon and gave it to one of these prisoners of war. And when she did that, a lot of other people in the crowd saw that and did the same. Now, it didn't mean they were feeling all warm and fuzzy about these people, because they were quite possibly the very men who, in previous weeks and months, had killed their husbands, sons, lovers, brothers, etc. But they didn't feel that emotion, but they chose to do the more loving thing. Now, that's a long time ago. Whether we could still do that if we met the guy with the London accent who goes around doing his dirty work for IS, I don't know. Well, I do know, actually. I know I couldn't. But I think Jesus is asking us to work from what is the more loving thing to do next, rather than how do I feel. So a way of love which is hugely challenging. A way of truth, not just who has got the truth right, who has got the absolute truth, which denomination has got it right, not that kind of truth. The kind of truth that you feel in your heart when you know when you're living true to the best you can be, and much more frequently you know when you're not. And that challenge to live more and more consistently true to that axis of truth within us. I suggest, as a Christian, Jesus of Nazareth lived totally in alignment with that deep truth in the core of his being, so that everything he said and did and even thought was in alignment with Abba, the Father. We are usually out of alignment, but the call of our faith is to live more and more increasingly in alignment with that. And the way of life, I believe that this is pointing us to everything we can be. It's actually the future of evolution, the spiritual evolution, as Teilhard de Chardin speaks of. We are on a journey to something beyond what we are now. But how we get there and what it is that we're shaping as we go is left to us. It's in our hands. And let me put this to you, the currency of transformation into who we can best be is not in the big things, but in the small change. In every decision we make, in every action we take, and every choice that we make along the way matters. It's impossible. It will either add to the store of love, truth, and hope in the world, or it will diminish that store. I don't think it's possible to be neutral. And the cost of living this challenge we see in Calvary, where light shines, where even our little lights shine, they will provoke a reaction, and the darkness will fight back. And yet I believe Jesus lives this truth, and dies it, and then transcends the destruction of the cross in resurrection, and says to us, live it with me, risk it, get in the wheelbarrow, trust it, and I'll show you what it means to live it, and I'll show you what it can cost. And you know, just whistleblowers or someone who puts their hand up and says, I don't think this is right, will get a lot of opposition. We all know that. I think Jesus warns us about that. And yet, that opposition, even when it completely destroys us, oh dear, I haven't got to the illusions yet. Okay, better come to on. We're going to have to finish with Jesus, friends, but to walk that way is the most challenging thing we could ever be asked to do. I'll finish then with a little story from my daughter's graduation ceremony. Medical school, Newcastle on Tyne, and several different graduation ceremonies because lots of new graduates. So the dean is giving out the certificates and asking the new graduates, just in passing, little questions like, have you enjoyed your time here? What are you going to do now? So, and then afterwards he told us about some answers he'd had in previous ceremonies. So one person, he said, had come up, what are you going to do now? Congratulations, and what are you going to do now? And this person had said, I'm going to be a leading neuroscientist. I'm going to push the boundaries of neurosurgery and have my offices in Harley Street. And so the dean had said, congratulations on your graduation. I wish you every success in your career. And then a few graduates later on, somebody else had come up, what are you going to do next? And this person had said, after a bit of thought, I'm going to turn left and walk very carefully down these 3 steps. And so, I put it to you, friends, we are engaged in something much bigger than pushing the boundaries of neurosurgery, important though that would be. We are called to bring God's dream to birth on this planet of ours in some way, to live the kingdom and make it real. That's huge. And how are we going to do that? By attending to the next 3 steps, the next 3 conversations, the next decisions, the next choices, the next interaction we have. So I better leave it there or they'll throw me out, and I don't want to be thrown out of St. Paul's Cathedral. So thank you very much, friends. So we'll